If a person coming before this body wanted to be a cabinet officer, he couldn't be if he had he did the same refusal Mitt Romney does about tax returns. So the word's out that he hasn't paid any taxes for 10 years. Let him prove that he has paid taxes, because he hasn't.
And that, of course, Senate Majority Leader Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. He's got Romney, as he says, on the ropes here, calling him out for allegedly failing to pay those taxes for a decade. And he cites a unnamed source, an investor with Bain Capital, allegedly told Harry Reid here that his old buddy at Bain, Mitt Romney, hadn't paid a cent in taxes in, as that said, that long time period. Now, CNN reporting that a second source close to Harry Reid is verifying the original source does in fact exist and is, quote, a credible person. Again, we have no names here. But a lot of folks are still saying, wait a minute, what is the source? Is there a name here? And what is going on? In the days since Reid's explosive allegations were first reported, the Romney camp has insisted that Reid ought to, quote, put up or shut up.
Well, it's time for Harry to put up or shut up. Harry's going to have to describe who it is he spoke with, because, of course, that's totally and completely wrong. It's untrue, dishonest, and inaccurate. It's wrong.
Ha, ha, ha. So the big question is Romney going to produce these returns before the election here, or is this issue going to fade away like so many others? Well, let's get into this subject with our panel here. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist, author, and all-around swell guy. Basil Smikle, a political strategist, former top aide to Hillary Clinton, professor at Columbia University, and he's sitting next to Andrew Whitman. No, I'm just kidding. He's a senior political correspondent. All right. I think this is a big issue here. Basil, a lot of people say, please, all he's got to do is just keep running out the clock here. Other stuff will happen when the debates come up. Things could come up with the conventions. Nobody's going to be asking this question in a few months. But if he hasn't put him out now, after all the questions in the primary, and after more allegations that he's now engaged in, this thing, I don't think, can just disappear into the ether. More people are going to have more questions.
It's not going to disappear. And you look, people vote on the economy. They don't vote on anything else generally. It's not going to disappear. It's part of that Romney narrative that he's this wealthy guy who's gotten all of these opportunities to move his money, to hide his money, to pay less in taxes than the majority of Americans do, the vast majority of Americans do. So it's part of that Romney narrative that he's wealthy and he is unfairly, he's taxed at a rate that's unfair for the majority of this country. Set of rules. And living by a different set of rules.
This is the smoking gun. This is the smoking gun of the presidential campaign. Harry Reid is not stupid. He's not going to just jump out there. Obviously, he's serving as a surrogate for President Obama. They know something. If it turns out that Mr. Romney has not paid any taxes in a 10-year period, the allegation, considering his wealth, in my opinion, this presidential race is over.
Well,
Term number 2 for President Obama.
What would happen if Romney came out and said, all right, here's my returns, you know, I'm not going to do strips and drabs, go through it, do what you will. But I'll tell you right now, I, Mitt Romney, did not break one single law.
Doesn't matter.
And if any of you out there volunteer to pay more taxes than you're forced to by law, God bless you, not me. I think most Americans say, hey, I pay what I have to, but I don't want to pay a penny more.
No, Richard, people are watching us right now are receiving dispossessors, being kicked out of their apartments, foreclosures for their homes. Some people watching us right now don't know.
Fight them off until 7 o'clock. At least last of the show.
At least till 7. Some people watching us right now don't know how they're going to put food on the table tonight or tomorrow. And if it turns out that super rich Mitt Romney, and I have been a defender of his, as you know, if it turns out he hasn't paid taxes for 10 years on his type of income, the race is over.
I just hope for the sake of Democrats that there is actually somebody that can produce this information, because then we will look
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter as long as the questions keep coming to Mitt Romney. Romney, I don't know whether he hasn't paid taxes or whether he got a refund a couple of years ago or whatever the deal is, what he's trying to hide, but it's clearly trying to hide something.
But if he hasn't put him up
and so
by
as
now,
long as the questions keep coming.
Well,
I thought always, Dominic, 3 people can't keep a secret in Washington. So if he produced apparently 20-some odd years here when he was being considered as a VP, I think he turned over to the McCain camp a few years ago. If that was the case, Nobody can keep their mouth shut for this long. I'm surprised that this thing's been a secret, or at least as quiet as it has to this point.
They're smoking him out. They being the Democrats, they are smoking Romney out, and they're doing a very good job of it.
Since we're on the subject of money here, many of you at home may have received emails from both the president, Michelle Obama, or Joe Biden especially, not just asking you to donate to the campaign, but pleading for you to send money. More and more here, you're getting the emails, the mailers, the desperate calls here, all for campaign cash. Now, 4 years ago, this same group here set a new record for raising money, and people thought it'd be the same time around. Andrew, not so much. There seems to be, whether it's manufactured or real, some legitimate panic in Chicago that somebody needs to show them the money.
And you're not kidding about all those emails, Rich. Anybody on a Democratic mailing list getting 3 to 5 email requests a week or more, and President Obama himself is getting involved. His website featured this video of the president donating $5,000 to his own campaign and encouraging all his supporters to give what they can as soon as they can. Why all the worry? Well, the president's senior campaign advisor says thanks to the Citizens United ruling, which opened the door to unlimited cash from corporations and billionaires, they've got a problem.
There's unlimited spending among these third-party groups, these super PACs, against the president, and we've seen, upwards of $100 million, probably closer to 150 by now, spent on negative ads against him by these groups. And so, yes, I'm concerned about money.
Hey, Andrew, I know people said, oh, it's the third-party groups, but even head up. This thing's close. Romney might even be raising more head-to-head here without even the third-party groups. Is it that Democrats aren't giving as much as the president had hoped, and the big-ticket donors aren't playing ball the way that the third-party guys are on the Republican side? What's the big problem for Obama when it comes to the bottom line?
Well, there's two big problems. One is that he hasn't had as wide-ranging support in terms of campaign, in terms of the $5 donations, the $10 donations that were so integral in his 2008 campaign. The other problem is that rich, wealthy Democratic donors are not giving to the super PACs the way that their counterparts are to the Republican side. Some on moral principles, some because they, maybe they're not as in love with the president as they were 4 years ago, but they think they're going to be outgunned when it comes to this, and they're already spending a ton of money on national ads during the Olympics, on cable news. So it's game on.
There is an air of desperation, and I mean, I get 2 to 3 emails a day, let alone a week, from this campaign. And I think you touched on it. The fact is that a lot of the big donors that gave Obama money very early on in his first campaign to get that edge over Hillary Clinton are not giving him the money directly. The Democrats are not particularly fond of super PACs, so there's that issue.
And what you guys know at the table that the audience doesn't is, right now in those swing states, the ad time's already starting to get bought up here for October, even September, here November. So if you don't get the money soon, you can't make the buy. And then even if you do raise it later, there's going to be no avails for you. All right. Now, we talk a lot about poll numbers here on a seemingly daily basis, as there's pretty much every political show. But there's another factor that really could throw off every estimate of how voters are going to choose whoever they want to be the president come this November. How many of them will actually be prevented from voting altogether? Now, I know some people say, oh, this is just much ado about nothing. I'm telling you, folks, you're going to hear this issue loud and clear in the days leading up to and after the election. A slew of Republican-led states here, many of which went for Obama back in 2008, now cracking down on who can and can't vote. And you'll never guess which party those new rules seem to favor, tongue firmly in cheek, Andrew. But we're not talking about 1,000, 2,000 people. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people. You add it up over the country, millions.
And we're not talking that far away. In our region, Pennsylvania is one of those states. A judge in the Keystone State expected to rule on the legality of that state's voter ID law in the next couple of weeks. This after the state conceded that it couldn't find any evidence of voter fraud. 0 examples of people voting who should not have, which is the reason officials in Pennsylvania and other states insisted that voter IDs were needed. Yet that law was passed despite 1 million Pennsylvanians lacking a photo ID. Of 750,000 people in Pennsylvania who didn't vote in 2008, who may not have the ID they need this year to vote, or that a full third of all the voters in Pennsylvania, they don't even know that a new voter ID law exists. You want to go to Ohio? They have a voter ID law. They've also cut early voting, even though both parties say, hey, that early voting disproportionately favors Democratic voters who might have trouble getting out to the polls. Most impacted, Hispanics, blacks, new citizens, and poor people, groups that usually go Democratic. What about Florida? They cut early voting. They have 2 other crackdowns in place. A voter roll purge, officials say, is to stop non-citizens from voting, but thousands of actual citizens are also on that list, most of them Hispanics, Democrats, and independents. State's also making it harder for ex-felons to vote. They now have to wait 5 years and then apply for the right to vote. Earlier, their voting rights had been automatically restored when they walked out of prison. That change is going to prevent 100,000 people from voting in Florida. 60% of them are black or Hispanic, Rich.
Without even ascribing motives, because I think a lot of us don't have to be cynics to say why this is happening here, I just get a gut, Dom, that people are going to be surprised how many people aren't going to vote. And we're going to have all sorts of articles and screaming matches come the first Wednesday in November here, the day after the election. I think people aren't prepared for how many people are going to be turned away.
Unless you live in the individual states that Andrew just mentioned, I don't think folks realize that there's an uproar, an outrage that's occurring. You said don't describe a political motive to it, but I have to. I really do. And I call it the fix is in. I mean, you can call it whatever you want. They, meaning in this case, I'm not siding with Democrats or Republicans, but because sometimes it's the Republicans and sometimes it's the Democrats. But Republicans are afraid of this guy called Barack Obama, and they have learned their lessons from the 2008 election. Number one, we will make sure that no Democrat outraises us with money again. That's lesson number one from Obama. Thus, the super PACs that are going to have, and you said desperation. For President Obama, it is desperation because he's used to having all that money. Point number two, that's step one of the fix. Step two is we're going to make sure those key Democratic voters, we don't care what you say, you will not be able to vote unless you jump through 3 hoops.
And just to be clear, Basil, real quick here, it's not like there was huge voter fraud before. I mean, they've gone through the studies. There was a fraction of 1% here. So this is really being done to decide who votes and who doesn't.
Yeah, you talked about learning their lesson in 2008. They learned their lesson in 2000. And they've gotten much better at it since then. And the reality is that voter suppression has been taking place since, since the emancipation. Poll tax, grandfather clauses, this has been going on from time immemorial, and quite frankly, I am surprised that more and more activists are not talking about this, given that we are so close to the election.
And as we know, with razor-thin margins, this thing could be the deciding factor. Andrew, there were other political headlines today, weren't there?
Yeah, there were, Rich. We got about 3 weeks until the conventions when we enter the home stretch of the presidential campaign. With 95 days to go, poll averages are unchanged. Obama up nearly 2 in the popular votes and just 23 electoral votes shy of re-election. Big news Friday, unemployment up 1/10 of a point in July to 8.3%, though it's really up just 3/100ths of a point. But that's enough to round up to 8.3, even though the economy added 163,000 jobs in July, beating expectations. The Romney aide who cursed at reporters in Poland this week taking some time off.
This is a holy site.
Rick Gorka taking the equivalent of a 1-week voluntary suspension. You may have heard a rallying cry about American medal winners at the Olympics being hit with $9,000 tax bills on gold medals, but it's not true. PolitiFact rating the claim mostly false. Medal winners are given cash bonuses which are subject to taxes, but there's no taxes on the medals, and their tax rate isn't nearly that high. And Mitt Romney endorsed by adult entertainer Jenna Jameson, not because Romney is pro-porn, but as Jameson says, quote, when you're rich, you want a Republican in office. And just to keep the reporting balanced, I'll point out that adult film star Ron Jeremy is backing Barack Obama. Rich?
Positively information
thorough
I
report.
did not
Fair
need
and
to know.
balanced.
Too much
Thank you very much.
information.
Exactly. Way too much information.